Hello, it's just David here with my weekly email. We have baptism services generally, if we can, in the main Sunday service because I think it's important for the whole church community and family to welcome a child or indeed an adult into that community. Now, I know not all churches are like that, and I know sometimes regulars feel, well, we don't often see these people again. What's the point of disrupting our normal form of worship? I have to say I don't agree. However, I kind of see their point, and also we increasingly, I think, get people who say, "Oh, we'd like a baptism for our child or a christening, but we only want to do it if we can just do it on our own." And I kind of gently say, well, in that case, you obviously don't want to be sort of part of the sort of wider community. So there may be other things we can do, thanksgiving for the gift of a child or something, but baptism really isn't what you're after. Those can sometimes be tricky conversations. And one of the reasons I think they're tricky is that actually when we come to the baptismal promises, as I always sort of point out, the first promise is not said by parents and godparents, which the rest of them are, but by everybody. The whole congregation responds. Now, you could say that's sort of wider family, but actually that's not what the rubric says. The rubric says the whole congregation. And it's a bit odd if your family makes up the whole congregation. I've been thinking about this recently to do with the Ukrainian crisis, and particularly the way some refugees are coming to this country and indeed to this area. And I know there's been a tremendous response, all across Europe, but also in this country, and also within the villages of the Welland team. And already we have some of us who are thinking of offering accommodation locally. In fact, I have a feeling actually there's so much goodwill. In a way, it would be good, wouldn't it, if it wasn't needed. But we have to sort of prepare ourselves. And in the sort of bishops' note, we're doing it through a diocesan scheme. I know there's a kind of national scheme. In a sense, it doesn't matter, does it, any more than kind of which particular charity you give your money to. The main thing is you help. But we're doing it through a diocesan scheme, and the bishop in that sort of quotes the proverb: "It takes a village to raise a child." It might actually take a child to raise a village as well. And that's sort of I think the thing that set me thinking about this, and I just want to think about what that means in this context. And he sort of turns it around and says it takes a church to look after a refugee. So you might just think about that as well. It's the title of a book by Hillary Clinton. Some of you may be fans, some of you may not be fans. That's slightly irrelevant. It's quite controversial because she, says it's an African proverb. And like a lot of proverbs, although people say, yeah, that's an African proverb, it's quite difficult then to trace it and find out where that proverb comes from. But anyway, we can see what it means. And we can see the sort of point that she was making. Strange enough, I had a bit of a backlash there. Obviously, Hillary Clinton is probably quite a divisive figure in America. And there was a kind of Republican evangelical backlash that said, no, it takes two parents to raise a child. That's it. You mustn't sort of talk in this kind of communal way. And I want to say, of course it takes two parents. I think it was quite a strange protest because I think, nobody's suggesting it's an either or. But on the other hand, yes, of course, whilst, parents are primarily responsible in the baptism service, they ask 5 out of the 6 questions. Absolutely. But nonetheless, there's a role for everybody to play. And I think, Hillary Clinton is right in that. We see it just, as a governor of a school, and chair of governors. We see it all the time. Obviously the school has responsibility, and sometimes I think it's almost too much. You have to say, well, actually, we can't make up for every sort of lack that parents have. We can only kind of go so far. But that's a good example of how, other people are, of course, involved in the raising of the child, as indeed they are in the church. You know, back to sort of Ukraine, and I think that sense of being responsible for one another, and not just living in isolation, is something to do with both how we raise children, but also how we look at society. And that's something that this crisis has made us aware of, that, that there are parents with children in Ukraine undergoing the most terrible suffering. And actually, we almost feel we can't. We're compelled. It's not just that, there'll be some sort of economic impact on us. I mean, our bare humanity, a semblance of Christian values means we have to reach out to help these people. I mean, and not just those with children, but with any of them. But the bishop's words were, I think, wise, because when they come to this country, I say it is a huge thing to offer them accommodation in your household. And, all credit to those who have or have offered. And I would say to anybody else, do think about it, but also think about it quite carefully. What it means, is it practical? Is it actually going to make the situation worse if it doesn't work out in some way? But beyond that, then, to also think, of course, that's the worst thing we can then do is say, well, there's a couple of sort of really helpful people, or people who are lucky enough to have a sort of granny flat or whatever, who can do this, and the rest of us can say, oh well, the village has done its bit. To those who can't offer accommodation, which of course I think will be the vast majority, however, there is lots you can do. I mean, we've seen it with the goods. I mean, I think there's so many goods going to Ukraine from all over Europe now. I mean, it's a big country, but it's, it's only so much stuff it can use. I mean, it's now difficult to get the stuff there. But if refugees come to this country, we've got to think about how they will be. They may well be traumatized. I doubt they'll speak much English. It may very well be that the men aren't with them. They're menfolk who, I think by law, I think it's between 18 and 60, have to stay behind and fight. So goodness knows what they'll be thinking about them. Will they be able to be in touch with them? They will have very little with them. They won't know where they are. They won't know how to get around. They won't know how to access services. Their children will need to be given education, and the children need to make friends. Even if we can find a school place, what will it feel like being a sort of 7-year-old Ukrainian refugee going into a playground full of strange children? There's all sorts of things. That's just off the top of my head. There's all sorts of things that we can help with. I think everybody can do something. And as I say, it'll also make it much easier for those who are able to have accommodation, who have the sort of facilities, to think, well, yes, I can do that, but I don't have to feed them every day. I don't have to drive their children to school. I've done my bit with the room, and but there are other people who do that. So I hope one or two of you, well, quite a few of you, will sort of help, particularly if and when they arrive with these things. And as I say, I think it's a great thing that whilst this is born out of tragedy, it does make us reflect on the nature of our belonging together, what it means to be a community, what it takes to look after families and raise children's, and to think that, yeah, we are part of one another, that you may be a single person in your 70s, but actually to feel that, yeah, you have a role in supporting children locally. That can be a wonderfully sort of good and freeing thing as well for all concerned. I think that's sort of important to remember those things. And perhaps I end with a word of warning, because I've done a bit of work on sort of setting these up and sort of getting things organised. I mean, it may well be that they don't move here. I know we talked about the Syrian crisis. I mean, it amounted to one or two families, and I happen to have a bit of a link with them because they are sort of locally, but they're in Ware. So I think it's almost a sort of people are sort of so geared up to this. There may be a feeling of sort of disappointment if we don't have anybody. And actually, I mean, the preference perhaps is to locate them more in sort of urban areas where perhaps they could be in touch with other Ukrainians close by. So actually, villages may not be ideal. They may come, but I just it's heartening in a way that I see goodwill, and I'm just sort of preparing people to say, yes, they may come, we need to look after them in this way, but also actually, in a sense, they'll say, well, actually, the response has been so good, they may not come, and we may just have to prepare ourselves that despite all our goodwill, don't feel spurned in some way if actually they don't arrive in this area. But anyway, we'll see. But if they do, just remember that the bishop is right. It takes a whole church, a whole community to support refugees, not just one or two people. Thanks.